Hi, I'm Michael Upchurch from Cardstock Warriors, and today we're going to take a look at the Dwarf Army. So, as with my previous videos, we'll walk through the starting abilities, the army abilities that you can select, and then we'll see each and every troop up close and talk about what they do on the battlefield. So, to get started, let's talk about their standard base abilities. They start with 3 instances of Dispel Magic, and as a reminder, if you haven't seen the other videos, Dispel Magic, when any enemy uses an ability or unit ability that has the magic keyword, you can use Dispel Magic to stop that, and those are free. So they also have an ability called Flee You Fools. This one says when an enemy unit engages your unit, you can choose to play this card, and your unit immediately moves half its movement directly away from the enemy. It ends its move facing directly away from the enemy, and the enemy does not get to make any disengagement strikes against you. So it's a free reaction. Once per game, they can remove themselves from combat. And then they have 2 uses of Take Courage. This is your unit adds 4 to their command. So if you find yourself in a combat that it looks like you're going to use, Take Courage is a good one to boost your command skill and even out that combat if possible. So those are their base abilities. You may have noticed they have more Dispel Magic than most of the armies that start with their base abilities. So they're more resistant to magic, but they really don't have anything in the way of magic. So they don't have any magic cards. They kind of also negate the enemy's base Dispel Magics because there's not really much of anything to dispel. So the next thing we'll talk about is their actual abilities that they can purchase. They have some of the standard ones, which is Weapon of Power and Weapon of Fury. However, theirs are slightly more effective. The Weapon of Power does still add +1 to all strike rolls. However, their Weapon of Fury adds an extra 4 strike instead of the additional 3 that some other armies have. They have one called Foolhardy Hero, of which they can only take 1. One of the dwarves decides to take a hero and take the brunt of the enemy attack. You choose the unit containing the dwarf when you play the card. During your combat, the enemy can only inflict half wounds against you. So they half the number of wounds that they deal rounded down. So if you get charged by a particularly deadly unit, you can use the Foolhardy Hero to take the brunt of that damage and really sustain your unit for a lot longer in that combat. They have True Artillery, which buffs your artillery, of which they have quite a few. You can play this on a Dwarven Cannon team at the beginning of your ability phase. In that case, you do not need to roll your Kaboom roll, which we'll talk about when we discuss the cannons. You basically automatically get to fire. And then finally, they have landmines. So prior to the battle, they place some landmines on the field. This allows you to select an enemy unit that is unengaged and strike 8 against it. 8's a pretty high value for a strike value, especially in a ranged attack, which this basically amounts to. A unit can only be affected by a single landmine per turn. They can't walk across multiple landmines, but basically you choose an enemy unit and you get to blow up some landmines. Finally, there's a reaction card that they can purchase called Dwarven Stubbornness, which you use as a reaction when you lose combat, and that will add +1 defense until the beginning of your next turn. So you've lost combat, you can use the Stubbornness to actually boost your defense so that in the next turn, the enemy has a much harder time killing you than they did this turn. So basically trying to hold on a little bit longer till you can get reinforcements in the fight. Those are the Dwarven army abilities, and now we'll walk through each individual unit and what they do. Alright, so we'll start by talking about the Dwarf Warrior unit. These guys are fairly inexpensive. They have a strike value of 4, command of 4, defense of 5, which is pretty high, and a speed of 8, so they're a little bit slower than most troops. They have no special abilities. They're just standard warriors. They do have a Distressed, which brings their command down to 2, strike down to 3, defense down to 4, and maintains their speed of 8. So for your cost, these are pretty hardy warriors that you'll use in combat. The next guys we have here are our Dwarven Veterans. These are the guys that look a little bit like your Duck Dynasty fellas. They are quite a few more points than the Dwarven Warriors. They're 50 points to Dwarven Warriors 35. But their strike goes up to 6, so they're going to hit a lot harder. Their defense stays at 5, so they're just as easy to kill, or just as hard to kill as the Dwarf Warriors. Speed 8, command 5, which is a lot higher. They do have a couple abilities, though, that make them a lot stronger. So Giant Axes, they have +1 to their dice rolls when striking an enemy, which means that they're really going to cut through the enemy's defenses. And they also have a once per game ability they can use called Stalwart, which if they're still alive at combat resolution, they can choose for combat resolution to be calculated without the remaining wound counters for either side. So if you this is a bit of a gamble in that you're going to use this ability when you're in a combat that you're pretty sure you're going to lose. So recall that you're going to declare your combat abilities at the beginning of the turn, at the beginning of the combat phase. So you'll bet that you're probably going to lose combat, and then you'll have the option to say ignore numbers. So if you're vastly outnumbered, this is a really good choice to make. They can do that once per game. They do have some distress values that bring down those numbers. Your other elite Dwarven infantry are going to be your armored warriors here. These guys, as you can see, are encased entirely in metal. Their defense is 6, which means that they only die on the roll of a 6. They're really hard to kill. They also have an ability called Ironclad. Once per game, at the beginning of the turn until the beginning of the next turn, they reduce their speed to 0, and enemy units have -1 rolls against their defense. So what this is going to mean is that if they stay stationary for that turn, their defense goes up to 7 effectively. So you're going to have bonuses that even hurt them. They do have some distress values. Their strike is only 4, so they're basically as effective as the Dwarven warriors in combat. They're just a lot harder to kill. So those guys stick around for quite a long time. Your next basic troop is going to be your crossbow guys. Here's one of those. They have low strike. Their defense is 4. They're not really wearing a whole lot of armor. But they have a couple abilities. One is Fire Away. That's their standard firing of their crossbows. They choose an unengaged enemy unit in their front quadrant that's within 25 inches or less. And they strike 4 against that unit. So that's a pretty basic ranged fire. They also have Aim and Fire. So if they choose at the beginning of the movement phase, if they reduce their speed to 0, their strike rolls are at +1 for their Fire Away ability. So again, what that means is you choose not to move, you activate that ability, and if you don't move, your strike rolls are at a bonus when you're striking at 4. So they're much more effective than other types of standard ranged people. The next thing we're going to look at is some of the artillery. So if you'll check it out here in the back, we got this giant bolt thrower team here. Those have a defense of 4/6. So if we haven't talked about war machines yet, a lot of the war machines have an ability called hide behind the equipment. And what that means is if they're not engaged, they count their defense as 6. If they are engaged, it's a 4. So in close combat, you're fighting the crew. If you're shooting at them or doing magic or whatever, then they're usually hiding behind the equipment. They do have another ability called rare equipment, which means you can have no more than 3 bolt thrower teams for every 100 points. You can't field an army just of bolt throwers. And then they have, obviously, the Spear Them ability, which is firing the bolt thrower team. So long as they don't move this turn, they can choose an unengaged enemy unit in their front quadrant that they can draw an uninterrupted line to within 35 inches, so that's your basic line of sight rules. And they strike 2 against that unit with a +2 to their dice rolls. This is really good at single target, high armor. You're gonna add +2 to those strike rolls, which means the defensive 6 becomes a defensive 4. And the defensive 4 becomes a defensive 2, basically. So they really can hit pretty hard. And they're reliable. They always get to strike 2. It's not a large number, but they always get to do it. Your other option is these cannon teams. So I'm making a good view of these cannon teams here. Those are similar in that they have the rare machinery. You can only have 3 cannons for 100 points. They do have hide behind the machine, which boosts their defense to 6 if you're ranged against them. Their ability is called Kaboom. So again, this synergizes with the ability card we talked about earlier, which allows them to skip the Kaboom roll and just get to strike 4. However, with these guys, you're going to roll a dice. On a 3+, they strike 3 against the unit with a +4 to their dice rolls. So they really punch through armor. These guys do a lot of damage. However, it's kind of risky. On a 1, your powder explodes and the cannon is immediately removed from play. So they're going to, on average, fire for you a couple turns, and then eventually they will disappear. Next up, we have our Dwarven Driller team. That's these guys right here. They're one of the most mobile units in the Dwarven army, so they're really going to get behind enemy lines. Their defense is 5 due to their small numbers, scattered formation. They're not as packed in there, so they have a pretty high defense. Strike is 5, which is pretty good. The driller team is never distressed. They're in loose formation. They never add their soldier ranks to their combat score, which means their strike is 5. They'll always strike at 5. They will never add additional ranks. They have an ability called Drill Them, which is once per game in the combat phase, they use their drill as a weapon. They get to strike at +2 for that one turn. That is once per game. They also have Underground. So at the beginning of the battle, you don't actually deploy them on the table. Beginning on the second turn, in the pre-turn phase, you roll a dice. On a 4+, you can put them anywhere on the table. Then it goes to 3+ on the third turn, 2+ on the fourth turn, etc., until they arrive. Next up, we have our Dwarven Gatling guns. Put these up front. These guys do quite a bit of damage. They're pretty cool. So they have loose formation, rare equipment, 2 for 100 points. Hide behind the machine, which boosts their defense to 6 at range. They have a rotating stand. What this means is that they may rotate in place, and that does not count as a movement. So this is in opposition to some of your other artillery teams that if they rotate at all, they can't really fire. These guys have a rotating stand, so they can rotate as much as they want. And then they have Hail of Bullets, which is the actual firing of the machine gun. So if they don't move this turn, you choose an unengaged enemy unit. Their range is 25 inches. You roll a d6 and consult the chart. On a 1, it's a malfunction. They blow up, much like a cannon. On a 2, they jam and don't fire. On a 3 through 6, you roll a d6 and strike that many times at +1 to strike rolls. So if you roll a 6, then you get to strike 6. If the target is within 10 inches of you, so if they're right on top of you, you get to roll 2d6, which means you could roll up to 12 strikes at a +1, which is a whole lot of damage. Next up, we have the Golem. This is our little Dwarven pilot here. He's got a cannon on his arm. He's got a little buzzsaw. He's doing pretty cool stuff over there. He has a strike of 6 and a defense of 6. His command is 5 and his speed is 10, so he's a little faster than your infantry. He is indomitable, which means he always adds his maximum number of wounds to his combat score. So again, he starts at 5. Even after he takes damage, he will still add 5 at the end of every combat, plus his command of 5. So his base combat score is a 10 every time. He has massive strength, so he strikes at +2. He hurts pretty bad. He has his cannon arm. Once per game, the cannon can fire. If he is engaged, so he's in combat, it strikes 6 at +4, which is a bunch, and it does a lot of damage. Otherwise, he can fire at 30 inches, uninterrupted line, so he's got the standard line of sight rules, and he actually only strikes 3 at +4 against that unit. So it's best to preserve that until you get in combat and then really kind of blow up the guys that you're fighting with. He is an unstable reactor, which means he has a tendency to explode. What that means is when the last wound is dealt to this guy, he will strike 5 at every unit within 6 inches. So pretty much when you kill him, he's going to blow up. He's like a little bomb. He gets rare equipment, so you can only have 2 golems per 150 points. You can't take an army of nothing but golems. Finally, and there's no rules for this yet, but it's worth mentioning, back here, one of our backers had a suggestion. He said, man, it'd be cool if we had a Dwarven airship. This is the prototype for the Dwarven airship. It is pretty cool, so I'm going to be working on rules with my playtesters, and we'll get something in the works for this. So if you do get the Dwarf army, you will get the finished model for this if you're getting the full set, or if you're backing at the $100 level, which is the lifetime membership. So you can look forward to that. I don't have rules for it yet, but we will have those coming soon. So next up, we'll take a look at what does it look like when we have a 350-point dwarf army instead of every dwarf known to man, which is what I have printed out here. So we'll take a look at that in just a moment. All right, so what we have here is a basic 350-point dwarven force. Just going to pan over that real quick. What I've selected here is a heavy ranged army. So I've got 3 units of the dwarven crossbowmen, 2 Gatling guns. I've got some cannons and some bolt throwers here in the back, and then I've got a driller team and a golem, plus my standard core infantry. I've got some veterans and some standard dwarf warriors. So I'll use the veterans and the dwarf warriors to hold the line and mop up the remnants of the enemy. I'm going to pepper them with as much damage as I can with my ranged units as they advance across the field. I'll send my driller team behind their lines and try and take out most of their war machines or ranged and then I will use my golem as basically a stopgap. I'm going to fill any holes in my line or anywhere that they've got a large threat. I'm going to try and get him. He moves 10, so he'll be able to get in to that area as much as possible. As far as my ability cards, I'll definitely take Foolhardy Hero because it's really good. I'll probably be outnumbered, especially if I'm facing something like goblins. Then I'll also take some True Artillery and some landmines. I'll try and soften up targets that are fast moving and likely to do damage to my gun line. So anything like some goblin wargs, some bats, things like that, I'll use the landmines to try and weaken them before they get to me. And then I will use the True Artillery to target any of their heavily armored troops before they hit my line. And then try and finish them off, probably with the Golem because he hits the hardest in combat. I'll preserve my Golem shot until I'm up against something really big that I don't think I can handle with my standard troops. Or I'll try to get my veterans in against that because they have bonuses to strike. So that is a standard 350 point Dwarven force. Hope you've enjoyed the video, and we will take a look at the Goblin Army next. So thanks for watching. Please don't forget to back us on Kickstarter, and we'll see you next time.